Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back into another podcast by George. Well, it's back to the world stage. Going to talk about politics domestically, and then, of course, what's happening internationally. Maybe a little bit about Biden's most recent appointments. And joining us to talk all about that is Matthew Hoh, returning to Podcast by George. And for folks that don't know, Matthew Hoh is a member of the advisory boards of Expose Facts, Veterans for Peace, and World Beyond War. And his background, in 2009, he got on the world stage, really, when he resigned his position with the State Department in Afghanistan in protest of the escalation of the Afghan war by the Obama administration. Yeah, folks, a lot of people have forgotten that. The escalation under the Obama administration, which we're still operating under, basically. Once they escalate, folks, they don't de-escalate. And we found that out here just very recently when the entire Iowa Democratic delegation voted against a withdrawal from Afghanistan. We can't come out of there yet, folks. Only been there 19 years. And that was just a look when he was back. Matt was in Afghanistan. Now, Matt also had previously been in Iraq with a State Department team, and of course, started out with the U.S. Marines, commanded a unit over there. He's a senior fellow with the Center for International Policy. Matt, welcome back to a podcast by George.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me back.
You know, the one thing I didn't mention is that you're writing now regularly in Counterpunch. The articles are outstanding. I'm going to put the web address up on the podcast. I want people to check this out. For one thing, if you don't have a lot of time, these articles are not long. I mean, they're nicely written, short pieces of information, and this most recent one was really poignant, and it knitted together a lot of what's going on as I started off talking about domestically here in the United States, with the world. And you started off writing last week, COVID killed more Americans than the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have killed since 2001. 15,682 Americans died from COVID over the 7 days from November 28th to December 4th. It's the larger number than the 14,000 killed in action as both service members and private contractors since 2001. Now, the thing that Matt and I have talked about that folks have a tendency to overlook, the number of Iraq and Afghan veterans killed by suicide since 2001 is more than 9,000. But again, that's less than 1 week's total from COVID. Matt, what the other statistic that I'm recalling, don't like 20, 25, 22 veterans die a day from suicide? Isn't that the number?
It's the number is a little less than 20, and that includes active duty service members.
So every single day.
Single day. The number of veterans within that is about 16 or 17. And among that, it's about 1.5. It comes out to about 1.5 Iraq or Afghan veterans kill themselves each day. Which, when you do the math on that, you see that it's and at this point, that 9,000 number is a couple years old. I just keep using it because it's the source I have, and it links to the VA. The VA itself has that information, but you know that number again is a couple of years old, so it's probably closer to 11,000 have killed themselves now. And as well too, that's a conservative estimate. We've talked about this before, George. How do you a lot of times suicides go unreported. A guy crashes his car or motorcycle into a bridge abutment. Did he fall asleep at the wheel or did he kill himself? Yeah, I mean, there's no the underreporting in suicide is of course well known and understood. But the point being is that sadly, and that article is using information that's a week old already now, and we've seen that last week we've had several days over 3,000 people die. So I'm assuming that this past week we've had well more than 15,000 people killed by COVID. And the point I was getting at with the article is not to say one is better or worse or anything like that, of course, but look at our reactions to these things. We had 3,000 people killed on 9/11, and the reaction in terms of our giving up civil liberties, in terms of allowing the government to record, surveil, catalog all our digital, online, cellular communications. You go to the airport and you engage in that just absolute charade of security there, where you got to take your shoes off. You got to go through those scanners that are, they've never caught a terrorist ever, but we keep doing it, and we do it willingly. In this idea, though, that when we're confronted with something that is very real, in the sense of like, look, we're losing 3,000 people a day to this, and it is, if not preventable, then there are real ways that we can reduce that. And then you look at other nations around the world. You look at, say, Australia or Taiwan or Korea or Thailand or China, where this virus started. And China's had, I think, less than 5,000 people die out of 1.5 billion people. So the choices that we're making here in our reactions are very telling. And then, of course, in the point I get to is the one thing that they do have in common in terms of our reaction is how much money we've spent on it.
Yes.
And where money has gone, right? I mean, like the trillions of dollars, this CARES Act was, according to some people, the biggest wealth transfer in the history.
5 trillion.
World. Yeah. Right. Just out of nowhere. They did it because they wanted to do it. They chose to do it. We can get into a whole conversation, right, about modern money theory, on that kind of stuff. But it really goes down to what our choices are, what our priorities, as well as what our choices are, how are we reacting to this, and what we're allowing our government to do. And because 3,000 people were killed on 9/11, we're allowing our government to go and rampage across the globe. And, an interesting number too, that equates in number, is that COVID's killed about 1.5 million people around the world. And in these wars since 9/11, the U.S. government has killed about 1.5 million people.
Okay.
I mean, so the parallels, you have to ask, like, what are we doing? Like, where are our priorities? Why are we making these choices? Why are we allowing banks and corporations to get rich while people suffer and die? Why are we allowing the erosion of some civil liberties? Why are we allowing a man like Julian Assange to die in solitary confinement because he told the truth? It is as perplexing as it is infuriating, I think.
Well, we've been successfully propagandized, is my perspective. I just can't believe, like you, that people don't see it this way. And to put it into my context, when I read your article, I mean, think of what you saw, what you've been through. Think about what we've caused to the harm we've caused to ourselves and around the world because we thought there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, even though we were told, I mean, the proof was pretty conclusive that there wasn't. So look what we did. Now with COVID, which couldn't be more real. I mean, the tallies, the harm being done, it's very specific. It's known to everyone. It's time for people to step up and have some shared sacrifice. Look at those men and women that got blown apart over there that you knew, Matt, over there trying to do what was right in Iraq initially. They didn't know any better. Hell, we know what's going on here. And we can't put on a mask? We can't use Zoom? You mentioned in your article that that's the perplexing part to me.
Yeah, is right. Like I think I said in the article, like, why can't we just go to church via Zoom?
Yeah.
We're seeing this massive surge in death in these last couple of weeks, which is directly related to the holiday travel over Thanksgiving, which was exactly what the medical experts said were going to happen. But I don't know if there were, what governors out there, what key political figures, who was out there saying, pleading with people to stop, who shut down the airports, who did what was really necessary. It's one thing to go on the air and say, like, you shouldn't travel. It's another thing to actually use the power that the people have given you to lead. And, so you've seen across the board, both parties, just an abdication of leadership. And it gets to this idea, though, too, to go back to your point about propaganda. Last time I was on, or a time or two ago, we talked about an essay I wrote about Biden's picks for national security positions and how so many of them are tied to the deliberate lies about these wars, not just Iraq, but also Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, et cetera. And, in that article, I discussed having to go to the President's Intelligence Advisory Board and, speak with them about why my information was different than what the president was receiving on a daily basis. So a lot of this comes down to, who these our leaders surround themselves with, and what information they're being provided with. That's a big, you have some of these governors who have so blatantly disregarded the advice from top medical and science people, and you have to wonder, who are these people who are advising them? Who do they have that are around them? As well as the priority that it takes, the politics take over any type of decisions that may be unpopular but could prove to be very necessary. So this propaganda piece is very important, because propaganda doesn't just include telling people information. Propaganda also, includes withholding information. Mm-hmm. And you see it as well too, just in the sense of we can get in a bigger conversation about our education system, but I really do think that a lot of what we have here in this country right now with this epidemic is a direct result of a broken education system that doesn't teach people how to think critically, doesn't teach people how to, utilize evidence-based reasoning, how to utilize facts in making decisions, et cetera, how to determine what is a proper and legitimate source to make a decision upon, and what is just a Facebook meme. So.
Well, you couldn't be more right. I just had this in my last podcast. We've become a nation of people where it's completely acceptable. And my God, it's third world thinking that not using data and facts like Matt is talking about, but what's right, right wing, is what you think, what you feel, what you believe. That's how you're going to operate. That's how you're going to destroy the world, basically. I mean, I'm just flabbergasted that we are thinking that way in this supposedly first world educated country. I mean, it really does remind me of tribal elders sitting around a campfire, which again brings me back to the Middle East, reminds me of Afghanistan. Before we lose Matt today, I wanted to talk to you, Matt, about the NDAA just approved $745 billion in the House of Representatives. All of Iowa's congressional Democrats voted for it. There was a small progressive wing that voted against it. And one of the provisions in the NDAA was to prevent an early withdrawal, which I laughed about earlier, but really, honestly, to prevent the president from, be it Trump or anyone else, to more than quickly pull out of Afghanistan. I want to put this clip up. Matt, maybe he's seen this before. I know it hasn't been on my podcast. Now, it's not a great video, but you'll get the idea. This is the United States making a turn, arriving in an Afghan village. Let me get this thing up on the screen. The question for you, Matt, is that common? Is that how we're received over there? Is that what you saw when you were in Afghanistan?
Yeah, you would get rocks thrown at you by kids a lot. And I didn't know sometimes if it was because they were replicating the environment and the feelings of the adults, or were they throwing rocks at us because they were kids? When I was a kid, we throw snowballs at cars all the time. So some of it has to do, but the kids also too would jump and scream and yell if you were throwing them candy. One of the things that was really drove me nuts over there was that we had this thing called atmospherics, where you're supposed to put reports in based upon the atmosphere. And so it was entirely subjective. And most of the time it was based upon, or a lot of time it was based upon what the children were doing, which was just inane. This is how we're developing our understanding of our occupation, is based upon the reactions of children that we're seeing, particularly when we're throwing candy at them or whatever, So it was nuts. Just to go back real quick, though, to what you talked about with facts and emotions, reminds me about 19 years ago, I did the Media Matters training, which at that time, it was one of the premier media trainings available. And I remember very clearly they hammered in our heads. It trained you to go on to MSNBC or CNN or Fox and do that 3-minute hit and, do it well. And they hammered us on, you're allowed one fact and that's it. And the rest needs to be emotion based. So you go on there to argue whatever you're arguing, you use one fact. Don't go on and say 3 or 4 facts, just one fact. And the rest of the time you are doing emotion based, because that is the reality of human nature. We respond to emotion, not fact. We respond to our feelings, not to our, the logic in our brain. We follow our heart more than our minds, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that is something that really, when you get back to this idea about why are people making these decisions and why, and so the same thing goes with Afghanistan, right? You can look at it and you say, how the heck, could anyone in their right minds think that after, and also too, as my friend Scott Horton says all the time, the greatest argument the greatest argument against these wars is the calendar. We've been there. Al Qaeda was at most 400 people total on 9/11. It's taken us 20 years to destroy 400 people, right? My friend Danny Davis says all the time. In the year before 9/11, the testimony by the Department of Defense and CIA and State Department and everything about Afghanistan was that there were 1 or 2 international terror groups in Afghanistan. Now, these last several years, there's 19, 20, 21 international terror groups in Afghanistan after we've been there for 19 years. Wow. So like that type of argument, though, doesn't seem to carry as much weight, to engage people rationally, get them to think critically. Well, if there were only 400 Al Qaeda members in 9/11, and all these years we saw what happened in Iraq, we saw them hold cities in Syria, their presence in Libya. Now we're fighting on their side in Yemen. We fought on their side in Syria. That doesn't carry the same weight, though, as someone like Liz Cheney, the daughter of the former vice president, who is the sponsor of that legislation to keep American troops in Afghanistan. Yeah. That doesn't, as her saying, what have you forgotten about 9/11? Yeah. And that's what's so crazy, too, is that, again, getting back to COVID, they're able to wave the bloody shirt about 9/11 deaths 20 years later and get this response where members of Congress are willing to vote to keep our troops in Afghanistan, keep the war going. Yet with COVID, they're happy just to point fingers at each other and not do, you look at the let alone the deaths and then also too all the post episodic disability that seems to be occurring in so many people who've had COVID. But you look at the economics of this, the number of people who I think one number I heard the other day was that 70 million people, or there have been 70 million unemployment claims filed since March in the U.S. In all of 2019, there were 10 million filed. Yeah. Right. And we know if the eviction moratorium is coming to an end, all that stuff from the CARES Act, that was, supplemental, the supplemental unemployment insurance for people who don't normally qualify for unemployment insurance. If you're an independent contractor, an artist or whatever, all that's coming to an end right after Christmas. And I don't know about you, George, if I had to bet money on whether or not they were going to get their act together and actually do something to help people. And at this point, the $1,200 they keep talking about, and this is what's so absurd to me, is that you're having people like Josh Hawley from Missouri, Bernie Sanders from Vermont, who are being lionized and held up for heroes because they're fighting for a single $1,200 check. Right? That $1,200 check is going to go right to people's creditors. It's going to go right to their apartment management company because they're 5 months behind on rent. It's going to go right to the bank. But where we're at, where and I'm not saying people don't need that $1,200, but they need much more. But the heroes we have now are only arguing for $1,200.
Yes, and and way late.
No.
And those same heroes were responsible for the circumstance that we currently have. They all voted for it. They all supported it. And people will tell you, well, they had to do something. Nobody knew that was going to happen this way. Yeah, they did. I was listening to Dylan Ratigan. I mean, he's a smart guy. He predicted that exactly this thing would happen. Who else did? Jimmy Dore. I know Matt follows Jimmy Dore also. Jimmy Dore will be the first guy to tell you that he's a pot-smoking comedian in his garage doing a podcast. He told everybody that this was exactly what was going to happen, and that is what's happening. And by the way, another plug for Jimmy Dore. Please call your progressive congresspeople in particular and ask them to not support the speakership of Nancy Pelosi coming up for a vote after the first of the year unless she finally comes kicking and screaming with a Medicare for All provision to the floor of the House of Representatives. Let's hope it happens. And if it doesn't, I think Jimmy's real point of all this is take a look at these elected politicians. Take a look at these progressives. If they won't do that and they're running on and getting elected and reelected on the support for Medicare for All, you got to ask yourself, are they too dumb? Or are they in on it? It seems like that's where I come back. That's where I end all the time.
It gets back, George, this idea of our choices and our priorities and what is motivating our leaders, right? I mean, look at our current nuclear weapons program, which is going to be $1.5 trillion over 30 years.
My God.
Both sides sign up for that.
Yes.
But we're being told we don't have enough money in the midst of a pandemic. Where, look, I made those comparisons to the wars. And by sometime in mid-January, COVID will have killed more Americans than the Imperial Japanese and Nazi Germans did in World War II. We lost 407,000 Americans were killed in combat in World War II.
Yeah, but I can't wear a mask. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and we're within 10 months, COVID is going to kill more Americans than the Germans and Japanese did in World War II. And we've based our entire foreign policy. We've based our economy, our economy that get it, both parents working, that whole like kind of wartime economy mindset, and as well as really mode too. That's all based on World War II because we lost 400,000 people. We've spent the last 75 years justifying so much of what we do based upon World War II because 400,000 people died. 400,000 people are going to die in 10 months, and we are just. We can't consider Medicare for all. We can't consider any type of economic policy that is going to provide real assistance. We can't consider debt forgiveness. We can't consider mortgage or rent forgiveness. There's so many things that are just, and we haven't even brought up climate change.
Oh my God. Well, I don't know. Let's make some progress on Medicare for All in a pandemic at the least. I'd love to see them get it in there on a trial basis, give it to some people because of COVID. And then once it's implemented, once people see how it works, and particularly if it's in for a while and they realize how efficient and cost saving it is, that it'll keep it rolling. And maybe we can, wouldn't it be something if we could get Medicare for All like we got Social Security? Well, anyway, we're out of time. My God, it always goes this way. Matt and I get to talk in two like minds here, and we always run long on time. I'll give you just a quick last word here, Matt, to wrap up this episode of the PBG.
Again, it just comes back to me about our priorities and our choices. What are we allowing our leadership, our elected leadership, to get away with over and over and over again? You look at Joe Biden. A lot of people, followed your lead and example, George, and held their nose and voted for Biden. And now we're seeing this point that are coming in. They're all coming right out of corporate lobby jobs. They're all glaring conflicts of interest.
God, Raytheon, coming from Raytheon, that Austin guy, the secretary. Oh my God, are you kidding me? Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Biden's COVID plan is really just to urge people mass. He's going to open the schools back up, and he's going to get the vaccine out. Even Trump came around to wearing a mask. So the willingness to do what is necessary when we're facing a real national emergency, let alone the national emergency of climate change and inequality certainly is another. We're going to have lots of people losing their homes and businesses next year. it just seems like there's no way to get past that. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully a lot of people are wrong about that. But yeah, what we keep allowing our leaders to get away with is it's nuts. It's nuts.
Well, maybe we can change. I don't know. It's a depressing time, and it's easy to get that way when you look around. But we're going to leave it there, folks. I'm going to invite everybody to follow Matt Hoh. He's on Facebook, but also Counterpunch. I'll put that web address up on the podcast here so that you can go there and check out his articles and all the other contributors. I mean, it's excellent. Counterpunch is the place to go. And also, again, thanks for watching, everybody. Podcast by George. Go to podcastbygeorge.com. Pick your platform. Choose the little icon, the badge that you'd like to follow Podcast by George on, and you can see us on each and every episode. Matt Hoh, thanks again for coming back to Podcast by George.
Thank you, George.
That's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up, folks. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.